Hello, this is your host, Austin Hopkins, and welcome to the Introvert Leader Podcast. Welcome to episode 6 called Inner Compass. Happy to have you guys here today, and just want to start with a thank you. Thank you so much for everyone who left a review recently, or a rating, or sent me an email, or reached out. Your support, your engagement has honestly been overwhelming and could not be more appreciative of it. So just wanted to give a quick thanks there. Kick things off, guys. So with me recently, I picked up a new hobby. I'll call it a hobby. I don't know if it's a hobby, but me and the wifey have been playing Scrabble. Right? I thought Scrabble was only for like 90-year-olds who have nothing else to do, but I was wrong. Scrabble's addicting. We love it. We've been playing, I would say 2 or 3 times a week. And just enjoying it. So if you haven't played Scrabble, don't be sleeping on it because it's a fun game. The other hobby that I've been doing a lot recently is pickleball. So me and my wife started playing pickleball about 1.5 years ago, and we've become addicted. So there's like a pickleball court right down the street from us, maybe 10 minutes away, and it's usually never really busy. So we've been sneaking there in the middle of the day, at the end of the day, and playing a little pickleball, and just been absolutely enjoying it. And if you're not super athletic, but you want to do something fun, this is kind of a fun sport that doesn't really take a lot of athleticism, and it's pretty low impact. So highly recommend. If you haven't played pickleball yet, you need to, because it's a blast. So TVs and movies recently, I've been starting the new season of The Mandalorian. Huge fan of that, been loving it. And also have been binge watching a show called Mythic Quest on Apple TV. It's in its 3rd season, I believe. And it's all about a gaming company, and kind of the Silicon Valley, stereotypes are on full display, and it's just absolutely hilarious. Great actors, and really enjoy it. Outside of that, I actually don't know if you guys know this, but I consume a large amount of YouTube. I think YouTube is one of the most interesting and important platforms that we have. And you can learn pretty much anything about any topic you could ever imagine, as you guys all know. And 2 of the kind of the creators that I've been really interested in recently, one would be Dr. Andrew Guberman. So he is a neuroscientist, from what I understand, and has a lot of interesting content about the brain and our bodies and why things work the way they do and how to optimize your body and your performance. And so I've been really enjoying his stuff. So I might recommend you check him out, because he has a really calming way of communicating it, but it's also really clear and engaging at the same time. And the other content creator I've been following is this guy called Cam from Blacktail Studios. So I don't know if you guys have ever watched or stumbled upon a woodworking video on YouTube, but if you want to find something to mesmerize you and yet at the same time keep you engaged and zoned out, you got to watch a woodworking video. So this guy named Cam has this really interesting woodworking platform where he builds really amazing custom pieces of furniture using really good wood, and kind of walks you through his process step by step. I'm not a woodworker. I have no plans to be a woodworker, but I can't get enough of this guy's content. It is so fun to watch. So highly recommend you check out Blacktail Studios as well, because really good content. And also, I've been learning a lot from his content, just on how to be kind of someone who's a creator and how to engage with the audience the best way. So I've been taking a lot away from him. And then to wrap it up music-wise, I have been listening to a guy named Realist K recently. He's kind of R&B, hip-hop genre, and it's all one word, Realist K. And I really like his music. So I've been kind of going back through his first 2 albums that I could find on Spotify, and really enjoy it. So highly recommend checking him out as well. So why talk about your inner compass, or your inner voice as they call it? And for me, I think why I think it's so important is that we all have an inner voice, an inner compass, that gut feeling, whatever you want to call it, that's ready to go for all of us, but we choose to ignore it so often, or we hear it, but we don't really do anything with the information it gives us. So, for me, I think that's really been a key to kind of where I found success and strength within my career, is really listening to that inner voice, right? And the more I'm tuning into it, the more I'm really listening to what it's saying and then taking action, things are moving, things are grooving, right? I'm making decisions that I don't regret later on. And then I'm confident when I approach decision points, right? Because I know at the end of the day, I got this voice, this compass that's going to kind of guide me where I need to go. And I'm always trying to listen to it. I've been thinking a lot recently about my future and where I want to kind of take this podcast, where I want to take, where I spend my time, what direction that's going to look like. And there's been something on my mind recently, something on my heart about kind of getting my messages out to more people in maybe a one-on-one way via coaching for leaders or career coaching. And so I'm thinking about that, right? That's something that my inner voice, my inner compass has kind of been putting on my heart and mind. I'm going to continue to think about it, and maybe we'll talk a little bit more about it later. But like, what is your inner compass? Maybe we should start there. Maybe you haven't heard that term before. My inner compass and how I like to define it is kind of like three things. The first one, it's kind of a voice, right? It's a thought or a feeling that gives you insight or direction on something. Right? Sometimes it could be an audible voice in your head, or sometimes it could be just a feeling, but it's something that gives you clarity, that gives you insight on an action or something that you're doing, and it gives you information. Another way I like to kind of define it is it's kind of like a compass, right? It tells your head kind of where it needs to steer away from to avoid trouble, right? And kind of also shows you where you're headed and how you need to jump back on path when you kind of veer off. And so it's really a compass for me, and that's maybe the most important part of your kind of inner dialogue, in my opinion. And then the last one is, I like to think of it kind of like a tailored coach, right? Like a personalized coach, right? Imagine you could pay for a career, a life, or a marriage coach that is always available. This coach will always give you their honest thoughts. It's completely free, and you have it whenever you need it. And by the way, their advice is perfectly tailored to you, your strengths, your weaknesses, and the situation. I mean, what more could you ask for, right? You would pay thousands of dollars for a one-on-one coach that could do all this. The nice thing is, though, I believe in every single one of us, we have this coach, right? This compass, this voice that can help us guide our decision making and can really help us maximize who we are individually. So, that's how I kind of like to define what an inner compass is. And you might hear me say the word inner voice or inner compass or your gut, and I think they're all somewhat interchangeable. But now that we talked a little bit about how I kind of view what an inner compass is, I want to talk about what happens when you don't listen to this voice. Because I'll raise my hand right away and tell you this happens frequently. I don't always listen to my inner voice. And I'm going to even give you some examples of times I haven't that are kind of painful. But I think a big thing that happens when you don't listen to your voice is regret, right? You have a thought about a way you could approach a situation that would be better for you, but you don't listen. In fact, sometimes you choose the exact opposite, and then later on, it becomes crystal clear that you really should have trusted your gut. I think another one that stands out to me is wasted potential. Right? When you don't listen to your voice, you're wasting potential. Because what if this inner coach, this personalized coach or mentor with you all the time, they gave you great advice that was perfectly tailored to you, but you'd ignore it, right? Imagine how much potential that you're wasting when you could be taking the right path, quote unquote, the right path. So I think regret, wasted potential are two big ones. But I'm going to give you a more practical example of what happens when you don't listen to your voice. So I want to tell you a story. I'm going to take you back, way, way back, all the way until I was 18 years old. So we're thinking, I think this is like 2008, 2007 maybe. And I remember I was 18 years old and I had been driving around in my parents' 30-year-old truck for the last 2 years. Right, so at 16, my parents were nice enough to let me use their truck, but it was a work truck, right? It was an old truck. It didn't look super pretty, and it was more functional, right? We used it at the farm to transport gravel and just random stuff for the farm, right? So, and it ran, and my dad made sure to change the oil regularly, and it got the job done, right? But I didn't love the truck, and so I really wanted something of my own. But I know I couldn't just ask my parents to get that for me. That's just not how it worked. And so, I think I needed to start saving, right? So I started saving money while I was working at this local grocery store. And this was back in the day when, minimum wage was a staggering $8 an hour. So, this was going to take some time. But I had super generous parents, and they actually made a deal with me where they said, I think that they were going to come up with 20% of what the total cost of the car was, and I would come up with the other 80%. So, I started saving, and I saved, and I started looking for the perfect Honda, right? Because I wanted a sedan. So for about a year, I probably spent 2 or 3 hours a night scouring Craigslist for my Honda. Finally, I found the perfect car, and me and my dad went and kind of, picked it up, checked it out. And I remember him telling me, Austin, this is your car, right? This is your responsibility. You're going to be cleaning it, servicing, you name it, right? I'm not going to take care of that stuff anymore. This is your car. I want you to own that. And, I'm sure I hastily nodded and started driving, my dream sedan, as they say. And over the next year, I drove the crap out of that car, right? If someone wanted to go somewhere, I was quick to volunteer to drive. I would just make up random excuses to leave the house to go on a drive because, I loved this new car that I had bought and saved up for. When I say new, I mean obviously new to me, and it was a used car. And so, as the months went on, I kept driving it, and, I kept telling myself, I probably need to change the oil. Right, that's a thing that adults do, and it's good for the car. It's not a requirement, but definitely something you should do, Austin. So, I'm driving, and I passed the 3,000 K in miles, hadn't changed the oil. Then, another 3,000 miles goes by, and I remember passing oil change businesses and thinking, yeah, man, I really should change the oil in this thing. But life gets in the way. So I just kind of would ignore that thought or that feeling that was telling me, hey, you probably should go change the oil, because I thought, it's no big deal, right? It'll be fine. But, right as I'm approaching the 1-year mark with my car, I started to notice the old engine doesn't seem to be running as smooth. But I didn't think much of it, right? I didn't know much about cars. I just thought, maybe this is just a thing engines do. So one day, I'm driving back from my home to the office during lunch break, and my commute's not super long, but there's a big hill on the way from my house to work, and it's a really long and steep road. And, previously my car had made it up this hill hundreds of times, right? But this day was a little different. And as I started kind of ascending the hill, the car started to sputter, and the gas wasn't working. And I kept pressing the gas harder with no result. And then suddenly the car just stopped. No gas, no engine response. And I had to quickly pivot it over to the side of the road. And, I'm like, what the heck's going on? So I took it to the shop later that day. And sure enough, I had completely ruined the engine of the new car. And the only reason why it was ruined is because I wasn't putting oil in it like a complete idiot. So I was devastated, right? I was embarrassed. And yet I was 100% responsible for the engine failure. And I remember my dad and I was talking to the mechanic, and he mentioned the engine, it wasn't going to be cheap, and it was probably going to cost close to $5,000. And at this time I had sevens of dollars in my bank account. So I just didn't have any money for it, right? There was going to be no way I could afford this new engine. Didn't have any credit at this point, I don't think either. So there really was no way for me to pay for it. Luckily, my dad was a great father, and he knew he could use this as a teaching moment for his son. And so I remember him saying, Austin, you're 18. You're an adult, and adults own their own problems. But I'm going to make you a deal. I'm going to loan you $5,000 to fix the car. This is the last time I'm ever going to bail you out because of your poor decision making. Going forward, you're going to be responsible for your choices, good or bad. And this was a blessing, right? Not every father or family has the means to do this, so I do feel really blessed. But, this story, it kind of shows a practical thing that can happen if you don't listen to your inner voice, but it was also pretty pivotal for me because I think at this time, this is the first moment I start to kind of feel like an adult where I needed to be responsible for my choices, right? And I knew that individual responsibility is what it was. And so I think that story, while it was so embarrassing and it was the biggest mistake at the time, I'm looking back now and it's a little less embarrassing, or I should say just as embarrassing, but a little less painful, right, as time goes on. But I do think it's a funny story to just show a little consequence, right? A kind of an expensive consequence of not listening to that inner voice that's telling you need to do something, but you just ignore it. So that's kind of what can happen the wrong way if you don't listen to the voice, right? The inner compass. But you might be wondering, like, well, how do I kind of start listening to it. So I want to talk a little bit about how you can start listening to it. And then I want to talk a little bit about why sometimes it's hard to listen to your inner compass and what really happens once you start listening into it and really using it to guide your decision making. So for me, I think there's kind of a few different things that stand out on the ways to how to start listening to that inner compass. Number one, I think you got to be able to recognize it, right? It's usually the voice first. It's a direction. It's an idea you have, but not always. It's usually the first gut reaction I have as well. Again, not every time is it that first gut reaction, but many, many times that first initial thought I have, that first initial feeling is usually the right one. So when you start to hear something in the future, I want you to take a second and label it. Instead of just ignoring it, when you have a thought or a feeling or something that's giving you direction or insight, instead of just noticing it and then moving on quickly, take a second, think about it. Why am I feeling that way? Is there any truth to that? Why is my mind showing me this other way of approaching the situation? So really recognition starts first. I think the next one after that, it really comes down to kind of getting quiet once you hear it. So, I think I mentioned earlier on and did a whole episode about my ADHD and how, my mind's moving a mile a minute, right? It's moving fast. And for me, sometimes, there's so much things that are going on. It's hard to focus on one particular voice or one particular thing. But for me, what I've tried to do is really to get quiet in those moments. So maybe that's physically getting quiet. So if I'm in the conversation with someone, maybe that's excusing myself and leaving the room so that I can think about, well, why am I feeling this way really quick, right? And you don't need to sit down and spend 10 minutes. Maybe it's a 30-second think on that feeling you just got. Or maybe getting quiet, if you're not in a conversation, maybe it's literally just kind of stopping what you're doing, taking a pause of the task at hand, and really thinking about it. Right? Thinking about what that feeling was. What is it telling me? Should I be trusting this? Is this fear? Is this something else? So I think that really, really helps. And then obviously you can't ignore it, right? So if you start to hear your inner compass telling you something, pressing upon you to do something, to take an action, to make a decision, to take a chance, whatever it looks like, don't ignore it, right? That's a blessing. I don't know if everyone in the world can tune into that as easily as you might think. I think a lot of folks struggle with that. So if you're one of the lucky ones who have started to hear your inner voice, your inner compass, and are able to tap into that, don't ignore it, man. Take that as a blessing and lean the heck into that if you can. So I think those are a couple of different ways you can really start to kind of listen to your inner voice. For me, I think there's lots of things, though, that make it hard to always listen, right? I might hear the voice, it might pop up, it might press upon me to do something or view something in a certain way. But for me, there's like a few things that always kind of get in the way, and I have to make a conscious effort to get past that. So the first one, it's ego, folks. Thinking that you know what is best at all times is kind of crazy, right? If you just imagine that every decision, whatever pops in your head first is always right, you're smart, there's no other information you need, I mean, that's ego, and that is going to get in your way. So the first thing I would say is, man, try to get rid of that ego. Quit trying to think that you're amazing and that you're perfect and that you've figured it all out, because you're not, and you haven't, and I'm not, and I haven't, right? As humans, we're not perfect, right? And so if there's something that's, new information that's being pressed upon your heart, listen to that. Don't think that you just automatically know what's right because in the past you've approached something like this the same way. Another one is fear, right? Your compass sometimes, man, I'll tell you, it's telling you something to do something a little scary. Maybe it's telling you to get out of your comfort zone, to raise your hand at work and share something that maybe isn't so popular. Or maybe it's, finally having that conversation with your family member and telling them how you're feeling, right? Being honest with them, being vulnerable, but you're worried how they might take it. That's fear, but something inside of you is telling you to do that. So I think fear is a big one that holds us back. But again, I think it's probably going to be a bigger pain of regret versus that initial fear to not listen to your voice. This one's a big one for me, which is just my attention, right? We're living in a season in a period of our life we got too much stimuli. There's just too much stuff going on, right? You pick up your phone, you can be entertained for hours. You're at work, work's crazy. You got deadlines. Your home life, it's going full steam ahead. You got to take the kids to practice. You got schedules. You got commitments. I get it. I understand a lack of attention, and so sometimes your attention is focused on so many other things that when something gets put on your heart, that voice speaks up, you start to see something within that inner compass, but too much other stuff's going on, so you don't even pay attention to it. You don't have time. So I think that's a big one for me too, is just making sure that I can devote the right amount of attention to listening to that inner compass, that inner voice. And I think the last one, most of us struggle with this at some point in our life, which is external forces make it a little bit challenging, right? Maybe it's the opinions of others, right? So something, we get an idea or a feeling that's on our heart, and we want to do something with it, but we're worried what people will think. Or maybe it's your boss giving you direction that's exactly the opposite of what your inner voice is telling you to do. Or maybe it's just the details of the situation, right? You're too caught up in the details, and so you're not even thinking more abstractly. You're just thinking really practically. What are the details and what are the steps to get this project or this situation through? So I think those are some of the ways where it really can be hard to listen to your inner compass, but knowing those things and then being able to kind of check yourself in the moment and hold yourself accountable to those things can really, really help. And it's helped me. I can't sit here and say that I've mastered it. I don't ever want to come across as a master of listening to your inner compass, but I will say that I have really, really made a conscious effort to listen to it more and more and more. And it's been serving me well. So my goal, again, is just to help you folks get the same value that I've been getting out of listening to my inner compass. So I want to talk a little bit about what happens when you start listening to your inner voice, right? So a few different things come to mind, and then I'll tell you a little story about kind of a recent story of how I've started to listen to that voice in a really kind of a cool way that's been a fun season for me and my wife. And the last thing I want to talk about is kind of what you can expect when you start listening to your inner voice, your inner compass. So the first one is you're going to have less regrets, folks. Right? I talked about regrets in the last episode. I don't want them, you don't want them, and if we can avoid them, let's do it, right? So if we can listen to an idea and a feeling or direction, insight within ourselves that makes sense, and we follow that advice, we follow that direction, you're not going to have any regrets. Even if it turns out poorly, even if your inner voice, for whatever reason, served you wrong, that's okay, because you won't have regrets, because you're going to know, hey, I was meant to go through that. I was meant to experience whatever that poor experience was, that my heart was preparing me for the next thing, right? And so I would say, yeah, regrets. You don't want any regrets. And so the more you listen to your voice, the less regrets you're going to have. And then for me, this one is kind of cool, is like you get confidence in your future kind of decision points. Like just with anything else in life, right? The more we practice things, the more we do it, the easier it gets. And if we get good results, we're going to want to do that more and more and more. So each time you listen to your gut, it makes it a little easier for the next time, right? You kind of have that successful blueprint to follow. So if you have something in your heart telling you to speak up at work and, volunteer on a project, and you do it, and the project is a success, you're going to feel good and you're going to feel more confident for the next time your voice speaks up and tells you to do something. So there are two really big things that I think start to happen when you listen to your voice. I mean, outside of that, I think it's a given that you're going to start to see success in however you define that in your life. Maybe that's going to be success in your relationship, success in your work, financial success, physical success. Doesn't matter. You're going to start seeing success. I don't want to define what that is for you. I think each of us have our own kind of definition of what success looks like for us. But the last thing I want to do is I want to wrap up by giving you one more story that kind of shows what can kind of start to happen when you listen to that inner compass. And specifically, I want to tell you about what's been happening with me over the last few years as I've started to listen to that inner compass more and more. So I want to wrap up by telling you about my move from Washington to New York. So it's April 2020, and we're at the height of the pandemic, and an old colleague of mine was moving to New York and threw out the idea of me joining and moving to NY for the new role. Right? This new job was going to come with more money, more responsibility. So obviously those are all positive things and easy to think there would be value in those things. But on the flip side of that, me and my wife knew 0 people in New York. The world was closed down, right? This was the first pandemic that I had ever lived through, that most people had ever lived through. And so, we didn't really know what was safe or appropriate as far as moving. And the idea was super scary. But something in my heart kept saying, gosh, maybe you should think about moving. And the more I talked with my wife, she was feeling the same thing. Something was telling her, yeah, maybe you guys should think about it. Right. But every time we talked with friends or family or coworkers, yeah, they were supportive and said, hey, we're going to support you, whatever you do. But they were also really vocal with their concerns. Things like New York is expensive. You don't know anyone. Everyone's mean there. Right. I mean, people had lots and lots of opinions about what New York would mean for us and why it could be a bad decision. I will tell you, those voices, they made us have concerns. Right. And we would start to think, well, is it really the right move or not? But we kept thinking about it, right? We're praying about it. We're sitting down to really evaluate the decision of picking up, moving across the country, literally in the middle of the pandemic, to a state where we know no one. Right after a lot of thought, though, we decided we wanted to take the leap and move. We knew that we couldn't have any regrets, that we didn't want to have any regrets, and we couldn't shake that feeling that it was the right move for us. So fast forward 3 years later, we're so stinking happy we moved to New York and took the risk. Do I think that we're going to live here forever? No, I don't think that we ever had the intention of living here forever, but we really wanted to come to New York and see what that experience is going to look like. So, some of the things that have been really, really good for us and blessings as the result of the move to New York have been, my wife's career has exploded over the last 3 years, right? She has gotten multiple new roles, made much, much more money, more complexity in her role, and has really started to, utilize the immense value that she can add at what she does. I was lucky enough to make some amazing friendships here and build a really successful department with what I think was a pretty special culture. And we even own a little piece of New York now, right? We were able to buy a home, set down some roots. And so, it's been really, really rewarding to kind of really see what turned out as a result of listening to that inner compass, that inner voice to move here, right? It's been full of challenges. I can't sit here and say that everything that has happened in New York has been amazing for us. It's an all sunshine and rainbows. It hasn't, right? I've gone through challenges at work, and my wife the same, and just the challenges of, adapting to a new culture, if you will, in a new state, right? It comes with lots of little challenges, but overall, it's been so fantastic to see that this decision really, really paid off. So I don't know what that inner compass is telling you right now, that inner voice. There's probably something that's already on your mind that you've been thinking about, that you should try, that you should do, that you should stop doing, that you should explore, whatever it is. But my challenge this week is I want you to start pausing when you hear that inner voice, that inner compass give you insider direction. So when you hear it this week, because you're going to hear it, you're going to hear something telling you, pressing upon you, a feeling, an emotion, whatever it is, I want you to take a second and I want you to just pause and think about it. Again, you don't need to spend 5 minutes. This could be 30 seconds. This could be 1 minute. You don't even need to journal about it. You can literally think about it in your head. But I want you to start really thinking about what that feeling is telling you. I want you to pick it apart, think through the pros and the cons, and then I want you to lean into it. At the beginning, I had mentioned that something in my inner voice, my inner compass was telling me to do was maybe explore a new way to help more folks with their leadership skills and really their careers. So something I've been thinking about is actually starting to offer some leadership and coaching one-on-one support. Right? This is something I've never done before, but I just have so many folks that send me an email or a LinkedIn message or a text saying, hey, I just want to connect with you. I want to figure out how you might approach this situation. And I get a ton of value out of that. I really, really enjoy being able to help people approach different situations in their work and their careers and approach them in a way that's going to help them find success, right? So I'm really thinking that could be something fun for me to do more long term. And so I'm curious your thoughts. I'd love to hear if you think that is a good idea, if you think it's a bad idea, and any other thoughts you might have on the idea would really, really help me out. So do me a favor, send me an email at theintrovertleader@gmail.com, all one word, and tell me your thoughts. Tell me if you think it's a good idea or not. As well, again, I want to say thank you so much for listening. Thank you for your engagement, and make it a great day. The Introvert Leader Podcast. Subscribe for new episodes every other Wednesday.